And we're back in the car for the second time today, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Saturday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, my earlier episode today was something I love, and you all know that, a boxing episode, and I have a sneaking suspicion that tomorrow's centerpiece will be another boxing episode, but that's neither here nor there. We don't need to get into that now. But on this day, 1989, saw the release of what many people believe to be the best film of a much praised and very well remembered historically trilogy of films, which were all released in the decade of the 80s. Capping an extraordinary decade for its lead actor. It's been argued, what's the greatest actor, what's the best decade any particular actor has ever had? There are some people that will say Tom Cruise in the 90s, and then there are other people who will say this gentleman in the 80s. And it's very difficult. There's no way to answer this correctly. This is not a 1 + 1 = 2. This is all subjective reality. As you see, as I see, we might agree, we might disagree. We might agree and disagree over what's the best film of this iconic trilogy. But on this day, 1989, saw the release of the third, and we thought at the time, final film in the Indiana Jones film series. The Indiana Jones series was kind of co-created by George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Lucas, we could give him credit for story concepts, but Spielberg had a lot of the concepts on this one, even if George gets creator credit. Spielberg was a very serious mover in the development stage, not just the spectacular direction of the films themselves. And if I'm asked the question, I brought this up in the George Lucas episode when it was his 81st birthday, week and a half ago. But when I think of Harrison Ford, I think Indiana Jones first, Han Solo second. I might think Rick Deckard before both of them, but realistically, when talking about the big movies, the most iconic roles, generally speaking, Han Solo, Indiana Jones. I think Indiana Jones. And part of that is that Indy is he's the main character in his own movies. Han Solo is important supporting character, but it is not strictly speaking Han's story. There are elements that are tailored to him. He drives the action at various points in the original Star Wars trilogy, but it's not strictly speaking about Han Solo. And when we take the 9 films in the Star Wars saga that are canon, great great New York University Film School word, it's Luke Skywalker, it's Anakin Skywalker. Han Solo is an important secondary character. I believe that Indiana Jones, you can argue, is the single greatest character in the history of motion pictures. I mean, if you want to say Ethan Hunt, with Final Reckoning hitting the theaters and all of that, you want to say you want to say Ethan Hunt, you're not wrong. But I happen to think that Indiana Jones is a better character. He is a more realistic Superman type of character, Energizer Bunny type of character. And the IP began with Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981. The character of Ethan Hunt, as originally presented in the 60s TV show, Martin Landau, among others, the character is not the same through the series. The movie series, and it's not a criticism. I often say that's not a criticism because the way that my presentation might be that I'm taking shots, I'm not. I'm simply recounting factual data often. And the reality is that the Ethan Hunt of the first Mission Impossible movie is not even close to what was presented from movies 3 forward. The first movie is a straightforward spy thriller. It's almost like a Bourne Identity. Like if his name wasn't Ethan Hunt, you wouldn't automatically say, oh yeah, this is totally Mission Impossible TV series. It is so much different than what was presented back there on the TV series. The character of Indiana Jones was created for the movies, was created for what became Raiders of the Lost Ark. And Raiders of the Lost Ark is not the sort of film that you would have expected to be an Oscars contender for Best Picture, but it was. And when I was in film school, which is quite some time ago, 3 decades plus, is when I began New York University Film School. There were a lot of arguments that were had by me, people engaging me in arguments, because already in 1994, 5, 6, and 7, my single favorite movie of all time was Hugh Hudson's Chariots of Fire, which won the Best Picture Oscar for films released in 1981. And Warren Beatty, hey, I'm a big Warren Beatty fan. Who isn't, right? From a certain generation, usually older even than me. So Warren Beatty won the Best Director Oscar at those Oscars. Hugh Hudson, the director of Chariots of Fire, was nominated, didn't win. And I don't even know if Spielberg was nominated for Raiders of the Lost Ark, but Raiders was up for Best Picture. And historically, that's not the kind of movie that gets a Best Picture nomination. In the old days where there were only 5 films, you had more prestige type pictures. Cliche though that might be, it's true. But Raiders of the Lost Ark was an enormous, massive box office hit. And Spielberg was still a very young man at the time. Jaws was, about 6 years in the rearview mirror, but he already had an enormous reputation for quality. That this is somebody that makes movies unlike anyone else. As the late Pauline Kael, a famous film critic of New Yorker magazine, said, Spielberg makes movies as if he has never seen a stage play. He thinks only in terms of cinema. He might be the purest advocate for pure cinema, even if he's not thinking of any such thing. He does not ever imagine setting a moment in terms of the so-called proscenium arch of the stage. There's a freedom of movement with Spielberg that really hadn't existed with any other filmmaker, and that is on display for the entire 2+ hour running time of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And Spielberg went from that into E.T. He went from that to E.T. Sorry, I had to turn the engine off because it's fucking raining outside. But he went from E.T. and then he worked on Twilight Zone, the movie, which was not a great experience because his then friend, weren't friends after this, John Landis, they all worked together. They had segments. There were 4 segments of Twilight Zone, the movie. It was George Miller, Joe Dante, Steven Spielberg, and John Landis. It's kind of funny. I was talking about John Landis. So Spielberg, he worked on Twilight Zone, the movie, and from that, which was a very negative experience because of the deaths, unfortunately, that were incurred in the John Landis segment. Most people blamed Landis for it, pretty much 100%. I mean, he didn't actually kill 3 people, but the kind of slack way that they were handling safety issues, not good. So Spielberg was in a very negative place. His marriage to Amy Irving apparently wasn't doing great at that time. And Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which many have argued is the most rewatchable of the 3 films, even if it's not as good as either the first or the third. I love all 3 of the so-called Holy Trilogy. I love them all equally. I have seen each of them roughly the same number of times. I think I've actually seen Temple of Doom the most because it often played on HBO and Cinemax. It was one of those movies in the mid-'80s which was kind of on an endless loop. It just kept showing it again and again because so many people, it's the sort of film you can just keep watching. But there was a darkness in Temple of Doom, which had mostly been absent from Spielberg's work. And I don't mean that there weren't serious themes in his previous films. A lot of people die in Jaws, for example. The Sugarland Express is somewhat bloody. Duel is a pretty pessimistic and kind of nasty, grimy movie. That was his first, big Hollywood film. Was Duel with Dennis Weaver. A very interesting movie with certain parallels to Jaws, which seems crazy because it's 4 years before Jaws. But Spielberg just kept working, and he kept putting out really high quality work, even if they weren't to, let's say, my taste or yours. Color Purple got a ton of Oscar nominations. I don't think it won anything. And Empire of the Sun, a phenomenal film. I would say the most sort of undersold masterpiece of his entire career, with the single best performance ever given by a child actor, in my humble opinion, in Christian Bale, and just a fantastic supporting performance from the always fire John Malkovich. But Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, sometimes there is an alchemy, and this is something that we talk about, film geeks, where there is an alchemy where you just happen to cast the right actor at the right time of their life and career in a role that it seems as if they were born to play. And Sir Sean Connery, what a fucking legend that guy was. He's been gone almost 5 years. I wish he weren't. He wasn't, he was up there when he passed, the same age as Clint Eastwood. But Sir Sean Connery, the original James Bond, and many people would consider the best interpretation of that character. I don't really care. I think every James Bond actor that we've seen through Daniel Craig has brought a certain bits of their own personality and certain elements of, well, this, Daniel Craig is like a Timothy Dalton, he's grittier, like the way Bond is presented in the book. Connery played Bond with a kind of brutish intensity and a little bit of a almost Gen X sarcastic streak to him. Obviously, a long time before there was such a thing as Generation X, before most of us were even born. Connery was the original 007. I think he played Bond 7 times. And then he came back for Never Say Never Again in 83. That was the kind of renegade Bond film. But Connery was not somebody, he was in a lot of high quality films that weren't James Bond. He did Marnie with Alfred Hitchcock, a movie that is a very difficult watch, a very strange and unconventional film for Sir Alfred. I still am not sure exactly what he was trying to do there. Tippi Hedren, her first movie after The Birds, she didn't exactly have a great working experience on that film, but here she was again working with Hitch. And Bruce Dern playing one of his crazy characters that he was kind of famous for and has always been famous for. Connery did a movie with Sidney Lumet called The Hill, which is sensational, but really, really depressing. So Connery was not afraid to go dark and to make these very serious, heavy movies, which in theory could be Oscar contenders. But as the 80s unspooled and he continued to make interesting choices, doing films like Outland, which basically is High Noon on a moon of Jupiter, very, very interesting film. Peter Hyams, talented filmmaker. He did 2010, The Year We Make Contact. He did The Relic, a really underrated horror film from the 90s with the late, great Tom Sizemore. Connery did Wrong is Right, a kind of satire on the way news is shaped. Sound familiar? Connery made that movie more than 40 years ago, but there was no concept and no idea that Sean Connery was going to win an Oscar. Paul Newman had been nominated a bunch of times and never won. Always a bridesmaid, never a bride. Paul Newman in all-time classics like Cool Hand Luke and HUD. There wasn't anything like that with Sean Connery. And then, like a bolt out of the blue, here comes Brian De Palma casting Kevin Costner, Andy Garcia, Charles Martin Smith, and Bobby D as Al Capone. It was going to be Bob Hoskins. Bob Hoskins made $500,000 for being on standby to play Capone because De Palma says, well, I'm not going to get De Niro. He's doing Angel Heart with Alan Parker. He's as busy as a beaver. I'm not getting him. I don't even know if he's going to be done with the mission in time, let alone Angel Heart. But they got Bobby D, and Bob Hoskins made his money, and the joke was, just keep putting me on standby. I'll take the money. Thank you very much. But Sean Connery as Jimmy Malone, an Irish cop in The Untouchables, walks away with the movie. And he won himself an acting Oscar. That is something no one saw coming. And ironically, the year before, Paul Newman, The Bridesmaid Never a Bride, finally won an Oscar. The year after he was given a Lifetime Achievement Award. I mean, it's almost ridiculous, but that's what happened. Well, we're going to have to give him this. We'll go the Cary Grant route and give him a Lifetime Achievement Award because somehow Cary never won an acting Oscar. How did he not win for Charade? How did he not win as Roger O. Thornhill in North by Northwest? How did he not win for Bringing Up Baby in 1939? He acts Katharine Hepburn off the screen. But you know what? I digress, as I often do. So Connery's coming off an Oscar-winning role. And he did the movie The Presidio after The Untouchables. It's okay. He didn't really have great chemistry either with his male co-star, who was Mark Harmon, years before TV, I guess, JAG. And also Meg Ryan. She was still on the rise. She had hit, but she wasn't as big a star as she would soon become. Movies just okay. But somehow Connery was talked into playing Indiana Jones's father in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I don't know how they did it. I don't know. Did Spielberg have to twist his arm the way he famously, and I talked about this in the Audrey Hepburn episode. I don't know how he got Audrey Hepburn to come out of a 13-year retirement. Her previous film had actually been Robin and Marion with who? Sir Sean Connery. These things always seem to connect. Spielberg always involved in these kinds of things, not in a negative way. So he got Connery to agree to play, spoiler alert, Professor Henry Jones Sr. That's right. His name is not really Indiana Jones. He's Henry Jones Jr. They named the dog Indiana. Our intrepid Indiana Jones was named after the dog. But as Harrison Ford points out, as Indy, had a lot of good memories with that dog. So you have in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade an incredible story of a father and son reconnecting with the fate of the world more or less at stake. You want to talk about a movie where the stakes are sky high? The stakes are very high in Temple of Doom, but from a different angle. There are a bunch of children who have been enslaved. As I said, a very dark movie if you haven't seen it. And Raiders, the stakes are also massively high because we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, and there's more theory in that film. We see more surrealist reality in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. There is a lot of theory in Raiders of the Lost Ark that whoever possesses the Ark is, unbeatable, but we don't actually know that. We see what happens in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. There is at least an idea that you drink from the cup of Christ, you might have eternal life. And the movie teases both ways. Is it really possible? Because the Grail does appear to have significant magical properties, but there are limitations upon which those magical properties can be used. So you have a classical story of a son who in his own right is incredibly successful, but he feels like he hasn't lived up to his father's lofty expectations. And this is something that everybody, almost everybody, struggles with at one time or another. And you wouldn't necessarily, if somebody 35 years ago, for example, or more, now it would be more like 40 years ago, would say, hey, what do you think about casting Sean Connery as Harrison Ford's dad? Well, people like me would say, he's only a dozen years older than him. Are they going to use age makeup, or how are they going to make it work? No, well, Harrison will do something. Maybe we'll grow the beard and he'll be gray. And Harrison doesn't look his age. And the truth is that even as he was pushing 50, if you didn't know Harrison Ford was pushing 50, you wouldn't know he was pushing 50. He aged very, very gracefully. So that was not a concern. But Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is a story of two men who are both headstrong, stubborn as hell, brilliant, not in exactly the same ways, well-read, learned men, one of whom knows that there are things that happen, kind of like Harrison as Han Solo saying in Force Awakens, it's all true. All of it. I didn't believe, but it's all true. There are otherworldly events that take place in the Indiana Jones films that before these adventures, I don't think that Indiana Jones would believe in extrasensory, extracurricular kind of supernatural shit, but he has seen stuff that cannot be explained. Henry Jones Sr. has not seen anything which can't be explained. He's an academic. He was the professor that none of the kids wanted to get. And the two guys are estranged. They haven't really had much communication. And nowadays, I hate to say it, I don't have to be a schmuck here, but they would probably be texting occasionally, hey, happy birthday, Dad, son, I hope you're doing well, whatever. But in the world of this film, where we're talking about, the early 40s, it was easy for two people, even a father and a son in the same field, to disappear from each other's lives. And it isn't until Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones is told, your father was leading a pretty serious research expedition to try to figure out exactly where the Grail is, and he's disappeared. With all of the issues we are led to believe that father and son have had, the fact that they've had so many moments where they were like this, where they were like almost repelling each other because they had different ideas about archaeology and about what's really important in life. He springs into action. It doesn't matter that he and his dad are estranged. I have to go find him. I can't allow this to happen. It is most likely really bad people who have taken him. I don't give a shit what happens to me. I got to get Dad out of there. And the way that the urgency in Harrison's performance in these early scenes, the way that he believably goes from almost not caring to, you could say, caring too much. And he makes certain mistakes in part because he is so focused. He's focused more on finding his father than the Grail. And that's a very interesting bit of nuance that this story gets into. Because I believe if this were real, that he would be satisfied just making sure his father was okay. And you know what? Let's cut our losses and get out of Dodge. We don't need to stay here anymore. There's a lot of real negative, nefarious people. We don't need to be here anymore. It's not that important. Let's get home where nobody is going to, hunt us down, and nobody's going to enslave us, make us drink the blood of the Kali as he experienced in Temple of Doom. And nobody is going to try to steal the Ark of the Covenant. And I'm not going to have to escape from the Hall of Snakes with 1,000,000 asps. No, thank you. I'm all set here. But in the world of the film, he does manage to find his father in some incredibly well-orchestrated, choreographed action sequence. Now, Spielberg is somebody who is not opposed to CGI. He's not opposed to having certain things done in computer. We saw this 4 years later with Jurassic Park, which I think is a perfect blend of practical effects, animatronics, and the best CGI that was available at the time. Most of the effects in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade are practical mechanical effects done during production. And those are ones that the film is going to age better and has aged better because of that. Last Crusade is the most emotional of the films because of the father-son connection and because the supporting characters, although you could argue that neither Marcus Brody, played by wonderful Denholm Elliott, he was in Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd years earlier, and also the fantastic John Rhys Davies as Sala. The character of Sala, I hate to say it this way, but his IQ seems to have dropped like 50 points between the first and the third movies. The first movie, yeah, he laughs a lot, but he's a very serious guy. Like, he's digger number one. He's the best at what he does. He has money, nice family. He lives very comfortably. Was he in Tunisia? I forgot exactly where he is there. But by the third movie, unfortunately, he's more or less a figure of fun. When they bring him back in Dial of Destiny, his IQ is back up. What I'm saying is the character is inconsistent throughout the movies, but his performances are all right on the numbers. Like, you can't do it any better than him. And he has some great exchanges with Indy, particularly towards the end of the movie. So I'm not going to spoil anything. But 1989 may have been the most stacked movie summer ever. You had the original Batman, with Michael Keaton and Jack, of course. You had Lethal Weapon 2, an enormous hit. You had Ghostbusters 2, a big hit, but it kind of disappointed at the box office. You had Ron Howard's Parenthood with Steve Martin and Rick Moranis, among all-star cast, Jason Robards Jr., Diane Wiest. Just a tremendous movie. Sorry, I'm going to try to... Well, you're going to have to deal with the halo effect, I guess. Just a tremendous movie, Parenthood. And he also was in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Summer 89 also had Karate Kid Part 3, not that good. Johnny Handsome with Mickey Rourke, not that good. But there were so many big hits. James Cameron's The Abyss, they cut it to ribbons. It should have been a better movie than it was. The director's cut, Cameron's preferred cut of The Abyss, is an absolute masterpiece on par with anything else that he has done, including Terminator, Terminator 2, Aliens, and Titanic. The Abyss, his cut is that good. So many great movies that came out in the summer of 1989. And Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade behind Batman, as I think it was the second biggest gross, $475 million worldwide gross in 1989. You can't do it any better. And it is obviously unfortunate that they weren't able to come up with a fourth film in due time. It took almost 2 decades. And normally we would say this is to the credit of Lucas and Spielberg and Harrison Ford, as far as none of them wanted to make a movie unless they all believed in the script. And that's great. But there was an idea, there was a movie, a proposed fourth Indy film. There was one that was going to have Kevin Costner, was going to play an Indy, like it was supposed to be his younger brother, his long lost brother. That was an idea. They wanted Connery to come back. But Connery retired after League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. They wanted to have him in a fourth Indy. It just didn't work out. And there were so many different people who wrote scripts and had ideas. Quentin Tarantino talked about it. M. Night Shyamalan supposedly was involved, and he had some ideas they didn't end up using. It wasn't until unfortunately, Crystal Skull in 2008. It's not a terrible movie, but it doesn't feel like an Indiana Jones film. I mean, the character is there, but I was so disappointed seeing that now 17 summers ago, which is fucking crazy. It was the summer of the first Iron Man, for reference. It came out within a week or so of the first Iron Man. That was unfortunate. But Dial of Destiny, summer of 2023, I feel like Dial of Destiny to some extent redeems Crystal Skull because of the way that the Shia LaBeouf character is handled in Dial of Destiny. It makes Crystal Skull seem less pedestrian. I think that it enhances it a little bit. I don't hate Crystal Skull. When I say hate, it's a 2.5-star movie. I hate the fact that they made that script into a movie because there was an idea sometime in the 90s. I don't know if it was early, mid, or late. I feel like it was earlier or mid 90s. The idea was to make a movie. The working title was going to be Indiana Jones and the Saucer Men from Mars. Just the title alone, I'm in the theater. That's a great title. And I read the synopsis for that, but I don't think Lucas liked the script enough, or maybe it was Spielberg. I think Harrison was on board, but they all had to agree, and that's how it should be. It's unfortunate that Crystal Skull, because the pieces were in place for it to be better. You have John Hurt, an all-time great actor in an interesting role. There's nothing wrong with Shia's performance. He came to play. He did the best he could. And Cate Blanchett never misses. And Ray Winston, what a phenomenal actor. There's just a lot of terrific people. I just don't think it's good. But Dial of Destiny, I've seen 3 times. For me, it's 3.5 stars out of 4. The OG trilogy are all 4 out of 4. They're all masterpieces. They're all compulsively, incredibly rewatchable movies. But on this day, 1989, the capper of an extraordinary decade of great films from Spielberg, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade opened in theaters. And before I forget, the thing I mentioned about Tom Cruise in the 90s and what other movie decade with another actor, Harrison Ford in the 80s. Harrison Ford in the 80s had Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Blade Runner, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Mosquito Coast, Working Girl, Last Crusade. He did the movie with Roman Polanski, Frantic, and I probably left something out there. Return of the Jedi. I would put that decade with Harrison above any other actor in any other decade as far as the insane, Witness, Peter Weir, 1985, the insane level of all-time great films from one actor in one decade. But on this day, 1989, the final film of Steven Spielberg's Holy Trilogy, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, opened in theaters. This has been episode 520 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Saturday early evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.